Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast, and it's always nice for me to be able to welcome back returning guests, and today was no exception. I talked to Martin R. Nelson, author of Children of the Dying Hearth, and I guess in a nutshell, we were just, in our own way, putting some of the world to rights, finishing off some of the conversations we were having last time, and spoiler alert, we're planning on doing it again soon. So I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed talking to Martin. Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast. This is part 2, and interestingly, we both agreed we're just going to make it up as we go along, because what people won't know is that after the last podcast, you and I carried on talking for about another hour about everything and anything. And actually, I've now just remembered, so welcome back. How are you?
Good. Good to be back.
I think one of the things we were going to get more into is the mental health of students and where we think it's going wrong, where we think it's going right, and also how the stories in the book and all of these stories that we often learn are really people exploring people's difficulties in real life and how somebody overcomes them. And that these challenges face everybody regardless of who you are. And although it's fictional, the best fictional stories are always based on somebody that it happened to, or something that the author witnessed or interpreted from a real life event. And it's funny, I was having a conversation with a gentleman a couple of weeks ago, and he was this chap's named Faust. I don't know how to pronounce his second name, so I won't try. But he has written a series of books called How to Fix Your Depression, How to Fix Your Anxiety, and stuff like that. And he made me realise something about the modern generation that I hadn't taken on board. And that is, they've adapted to absorbing information in 30 seconds to a minute. So I'm always like, the problem with the youth of today is that they don't know how to be bored. They don't know how to be this. They don't know how to be that. Based on when I was a kid, you just learnt to play in mud and made it entertaining, and he was just like, no, they've learnt to watch a 1-minute video while doing something else. They can chat to their friends and do this, and they absorb information at a rapid rate, but you have to make it stick for them to be interested in taking it further. And do you see that in the classroom? Yeah. It
was during COVID, it was especially difficult. And it was the Herculean task that, we went on Zoom for a year and a half, and it was the command of the school was, you need to be more entertaining than the room the kids want to spend all their lives in. They want the teachers to be more entertaining than the internet, essentially. There is
an impossible task. No offense, but when you're competing against puppies and people falling over, it's just like,
when you're competing for the attention of a teenage boy between Viking history, which albeit can be very fascinating to the teenage male mind, between that or Call of Duty, I'm going to lose every time. It's a contest, and there are several kids that I would catch. Right now we're engaged with each other. I'd see them kind of like this, and they'd just be really focused on something off screen, and I could see their hands kind of like, all right, you're doing something else. And it's so during COVID it was especially difficult, but I think just in general there's I mentioned this last time, a kind of apathy towards a lot in the world. At the same time, there's a hyper fixation or hyper care towards a lot in the world. Like, they want to know everything that's going on, but they don't really want to care about it. Which I think kind of comes from that 30-second attention span almost of, I want a little bit of everything, but not an in-depth review or analysis of everything. and you mentioned as a kid playing in the mud. I remember
Mm.
playing in my backyard growing. I'd have little army men, GI Joes,
Yes.
the little army men with like a parachute. I just throw them off the deck and just watch them fall to the ground and
Yeah.
make up little stories in my head. And I think the current kind of Zoomer generation is has been somewhat raised by parents that, and I don't want to fault the parents entirely, but at the same time, it feels like there's been a push towards the kids need to be entertained. They need to have something in front of them. They need something to stimulate them. And as an author, there's a little worry in my head of, well, where's their imagination then?
Yeah.
Because you're essentially giving them an imagination. You're not letting their imagination flourish on its own. So I have this discussion with my wife every now and then, because we were talking about this before. We just welcomed our first our daughter, and she's now a little over a month old, and just thinking like, all right, what stuff do we need to get as new parents? And I'm a bit of a minimalist in that sense, and so. I mean, do we need a big playpen or a big play structure for her? I'm of the mindset that if we got a new refrigerator, she can play with the box.
Yeah.
And you know anything about toddlers, like they can play with the box for days on end.
They can. You and I would have had the same toys for years.
Yeah. I mean, I was telling her that when I was growing up, and it blew me away. I was like, you never made a fort out of blankets? And
Yeah.
she's like, what do you mean? Like, yeah. Put blankets on the furniture, and you'd have tunnels, and you'd move between like ottoman, which is a little kind of central hub that you could move. I mean, it's your imagination just runs with it.
Yeah.
But if you're instead plopped in front of a screen and told to watch something, it feels almost like a force feeding that a lot of these kids, I think, grew up on. And so that sort of TikTok, Instagram reel, Facebook reel sort of mindset of, here's a 30-second video. What do I need to know? The 30-second video of some aspect with Call of Duty, let's say something they're interested in. Doesn't really matter. It's the kind of the attention span for one, which I think comes from a more early childhood mindset that years ago when I was waiting tables, it kind of depressed me. Not just waiting tables, but the going to a table and seeing a family that, I mean, in total understanding of them, it's a tired mom and dad, and they have their 3-year-old, and they want to go out, and they don't want to cook, and they just kind of want to break from life, maybe back to kind of a pre-kid normalcy, maybe. And they have their toddler there with an iPad or with their iPhone, and they're just sitting there playing a game on it. And it's such a generational difference just between me, let alone when I talk to my parents about their upbringing. I mean, they're much more in the generation of kids should be seen and not heard.
Yeah, that was my generation. That was kids should be seen and not heard.
Yeah, but yeah, it's just, I think that kind of weird dichotomy of the kids want to know everything, but it's such an information overload they don't care.
Yeah, it was interesting because you say that children should be seen and not heard, and I was the generation that children should be seen and not heard. And if you couldn't understand that role, your dad would be heard and then felt. Yeah. and you discovered that your dad's arms extended well across the table as they cracked you around the back of the ear. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's,
let alone if there was anything like a belt or.
Oh yeah, no, I had the leather belt. Yeah, I had that leather.
I told one of my classes this a while ago. The old phrase "pick your switch," which my parents never did that for me, but I was aware of it, and it's just hearing it from these 8th graders, these kind of 12, 13-year-old kids. I'm like, what? Like, parents used to do that, yeah, they would.
Yeah. I can remember when I was really young, but I was born in '74, so I can remember close friends of my dad, like babysitting and stuff like that. I was a kid. We were living in Cyprus because my dad was in the army, so it had been around 82, and I can't remember why they were looking afterwards, but I remember misbehaving and him cracking me around the back of the legs, like proper. I had tears.
Yeah.
And the second thing I was thinking about is, please don't tell my dad you had to hit me, because my dad would be so angry that I didn't behave myself. And
then you get it twice.
yeah, that's exactly what would have happened. I'd have got another hiding. And like I said, I remember getting the leather belt as a kid. And it's weird because when people talk about it, I honestly never had a problem with it. I still don't have a problem with, but I understand where people's concerns are. Now, my dad, I remember as I got older, my dad explained something to me that I always understood well. And that's, you're not in trouble because of what you've done, you're in trouble because you got caught doing it. And I realised that it's about the accountability, that if you're going to do something you shouldn't, there's accountability for that if you get caught. And that's effectively what he was telling me. But then there were kids that I would have gone to school with that knew if they'd been in trouble because they'd had the marks on them when they come to school. And there was a difference between how punishment was dished out. Like 90% of the kids I knew would have got a clip round the ear off their old man, might have got spanked. Do you know what I mean? But it was an instant stop what you're doing. You know what I mean? That was it. And typically everybody that I knew, within 5 minutes, your dad had forgotten it happened. We move on. We don't worry about it. Yeah. But then, like all of these, and it was the same when kids were getting given the cane and stuff. There was the ones that this is just a sharp punishment to remind you of the boundaries. And then there's the ones, I'm having a really bad day and I'm going to take it out on you.
Yeah. And it's the former thing that you brought, the word boundary, I think is the key for all. It's teaching boundaries to kids. And it's obviously, there's the latter side of that, which the ones where it's a gratuitous, or it's you recognize there's something wrong clearly with what the parent's doing. They're not just trying to teach their kid, like, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. Don't puncture the car's tires. Like, that's not okay. Smack in the back of the head with it.
No, but that's what it is, isn't it? It was a quick punishment, and it was a punishment that was over as fast as it started. So it was about instant discomfort. Yeah. The back of your leg might throb for the next 30 minutes. But you weren't then grounded. You weren't then scolded moving forward. It was done and dusted. We don't want to talk about it again. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But it was, again, it's like I said, it's when it was done in that capacity. And I look at that and I see that in the animal world all day, every day, where animal parents will quickly nip, a cat, a lion, or they'll quickly scold the child with some form of physical punishment, and then it's done.
It's interesting you brought up animals, because I'd read a study a little while ago of kids that grow up with animals in the household typically develop greater levels of empathy. And I think that it's a neat correlation to what we're discussing, because in a way the animals have become the disciplinarians of the household, because there's been such a push towards don't physically discipline your kids. Even at this point, there's a push towards don't discipline your kids of timeouts. Like, well, you don't want them in isolation, and it's harming for their psyche and their emotional development. And there's such a push towards kind of too much compassion, if that's okay to say.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I think boundaries. I think I might be misquoting here, so if I am, I apologise. They're either talking about it, or they've brought in a law now in the UK, you are not allowed to smack your child. And I don't have any kids, so I don't have any skin in the game, if you know what I mean. But the problem is compassion should come after boundaries. Boundaries are what set you up to be a good person in life, a good partner, a good friend, a good member of society. If they have no boundaries, and the way that I look at boundaries, and when I'm coaching people and stuff, and the way I talk about boundaries, is a boundary is something that when somebody pushes up against it, you need to push back really hard, really quickly. Just like it's an absolute, you don't do that. And the reason for that is, again, I use an example of animals. If you look at animals, when people put up fences, like herd, cows and stuff, if there's no electric fence, they lean up against that fence and they rub up against it until eventually they knock it over and the boundary's gone. When you put up an electric fence, they always stay about 3 feet away from it. And then that's how I think boundaries should be. It should be a really rapid shock and now step back. And from that point, we move on.
It's if you have a aggressive, maybe violent pushback at what you're doing is really delineating that there is a boundary, which is for early childhood development. You're essentially helping the child recognize the existence of other people.
Yeah.
And I think in adults that can it translates just as well almost, because I mean, how many times in a business environment someone asks something of an employee that the employee isn't comfortable doing, but the employee doesn't push back on it. Say, "Oh, Johnson, can you come in on the weekend?" Well, it's my kid's graduation. I can't really, I guess. All right. And so in the eyes of the employer, it's, you are an expendable asset that I can kind of use however I want. And what Johnson, what the employee or whoever it is should really do is say, "No, I can't. I'm not going to. I already have plans. If you really need this done, I can do it when I come in Monday. But no, because I have my own life and I have my own things that are set up. I'm not here just for you to kind of use at your disposal." Which again, I think that's kind of what I was getting at before with the animals. Is it's funny that the animals are within the household becoming almost the parents, the teachers of humanity then for kids.
It is.
You pull a cat's tail, it's going to scratch you.
That's fine.
This is big. This is something other than me. I probably shouldn't do this.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's that fine line between sudden shock and irreversible damage. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, and I definitely, look, there was countless times when I was a kid, you heard about drunk parents, angry parents, and kids getting proper battered. And that's not what we're referring to. Do you know what I mean?
No.
It's, and to be fair, as I got older with my dad, the kind of the physical punishment stopped. And it became more consequences like, right, you're staying in your room for the next 48 hours, But it's an interesting one, because I don't think, I have a funny feeling, because the pendulum always seems to swing. And when it goes one way too far, it tends to come back too far. And I wonder if this generation that have never been punished, when they have children, they will start to punish. Because, I don't think they've learned the coping skills of how to deal with it.
Yeah. And I think that in general, just coping skills. There's a fantastic Stoic quote. I love that. The struggle is the way.
Yeah.
And you need struggle in your life. You need hardship. You need some sort of, you need a heroic quest.
Yeah, you do.
And that can be internal, it can be external, or else you're just kind of floating through life like a leaf in the wind that doesn't really have much purpose. And it's extrapolating from that. I mean, the struggle gives you purpose. And that's one of the reasons that, like last time we were talking about depression and it being kind of a first world problem, because I see this with kids of, they don't want things to be hard. They want it to be easy. They don't want any struggle in life. And then when they do get some sort of pushback from a teacher or an employer or a parent, they're kind of met with this crumbling attitude of like, oh God, what do I do?
Yeah.
Because they haven't necessarily they haven't trained their own mind to develop coping mechanisms. And I mean, kids are always trying to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
Some kids, their coping mechanism is slam the door and stew or write in a journal, or I mean, but one of the nice things about adolescence, and one of the nice things I think that I've really enjoyed about teaching at the high school level is you can kind of give them that grace of, you're trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
You don't know it yet. So you're trying to figure out what's going on. The part that I run into that's a little depressing is there's certain coping mechanisms and struggles that they should have overcome when they're 15, 16, 17 that they haven't. And that's when it's like, you got to, and I like to shock and say, you guys are like a year away, 2 years away from voting.
Mm.
Like you're about this close to, if you do something wrong, it's not, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to shoplift this, whatever it is. It's like, tough luck, you're going to jail.
Yeah, yeah.
Not movie slap on the wrist jail, you're going to don't drop the soap jail.
It's true.
So
and it's funny. I have this story that I tell sometimes. So back in my 20s and stuff, I got into trouble when I nearly went to prison and stuff like that, right? And one of the things I point out to people is because, there's this concept that and it's only by people that have never broken the law and people that have never kind of run around in that kind of, I don't care about life, I'm going to do what I want, And so, sort of to paraphrase, I was a bit of a dickhead for a few years until the law caught up with me, right? And I nearly went to prison, right? So, and what you can't get people to understand is, you think I didn't know what the law was. I didn't care. I knew exactly. And when I was doing my 200 odd hours of community service, everybody on that community service bus was the same as me. We knew what the law was. We were just like, well, we'll worry about that if we get caught. And the law, and I try and explain this to people, the law did not apply to me because I never had any intention of following it if it didn't suit me. And that applies to everybody that gets into trouble with the law. So when they make laws, they make them for everybody else. Because people who break laws, we're not innocent, we're not ignorant, we know damn well what we're doing, we don't care, and we're prepared to risk the consequences. And it's as simple as that. And I try, and I was brought up well. It didn't stop me getting kicked out of school. My parents, my mum and dad never drank. They were teetotal. They both worked, were working class. I was raised as a Southern Irish Catholic. Do you know what I mean? I have more morals than most people. I still got kicked out of school. I still got into trouble with the law. It had nothing to do with my upbringing. It had everything to do with I couldn't give a monkeys. And I thought I was clever. And I thought it was funny. And I was the classic, as Jordan Peterson would call it, it's the Peter Pan syndrome. He hasn't learned to grow up yet because he hasn't had any responsibility. But I will talk to people about this. And they're like, oh yeah, but the law. No. I knew every law I broke. Didn't care. It was, and I'd been to court without a solicitor and even argued my own cases and won, because that's how the law works. And you're lecturing somebody and you've never been in court. I've been in court 100 times. Do you know what I mean? From everything from doing things to non-payment of fines. And once you understand the law, you realise, oh right, it's this very nuanced and there's very details. And actually, you can get arrested, and if they do it wrong, regardless of what you've done, you're not going to court. Because you'll just say, but that's a wrongful arrest, so I shouldn't even be here, should I, officer? Yeah. So, you know, and people don't understand this because they've never broken the law. But they're the ones that make the laws. And it's like, no, you're the wrong people to be doing this.
Yeah, there's I think with some of the younger generation, it's moving away from that, which is the scary thing, is that they're not aware of, like, oh, this is a bad thing to do. It's like, yeah, it is. You shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
But what you were saying of who the laws are kind of made for is, I heard a fantastic example a while ago that like parking fines. are just poor taxes. That's all it is.
Yeah.
It's a tax on the poor, because the guy driving the Lamborghini, the Maserati, the Rolls Royce, if it says don't park here, a $50 fine, it just means it's a $50 parking spot.
Yeah.
That's it.
I can get. My sister used to be a nanny, back in like the early noughties, and she was in Kensington in South London. South Kensington in London, and basically was a nanny for a millionaire. And that's exactly, he parked in the same spot every day and got a ticket every day and just paid it. And it was like £50 a time. So he was just paying it, because to him it was just a £50 parking spot. He did not care in the slightest. Yeah. And this guy, this guy was in his mid-20s and he was a millionaire, and already was driving an M3, already had a nanny looking after his kid. Do you know what I mean? And to him, I'll just park. He parked wherever he wanted, because he could afford the tickets.
Yeah.
And he paid them. He didn't even dispute them, didn't even care about them. He just, at the end of every week, he just paid them.
Why would he? I mean, it's the same sort of thing of, if there was a parking fine out from my house, I was like, all right, we're going to fine you 5 cents. It's like, all right, whatever. I don't care.
I'd imagine on a really bad week, he would get more parking fines than I got paid. Because he had that money.
Yeah. It's lifestyles that it's hard for a lot of people to grasp.
Yeah. But I think my biggest fear for kids, what, like you were saying, is, and I see it with my niece and stuff like that, is they're going to become adults, and things are going to hit them that you haven't learned how to cope with yet. And it's the worst one that will hit all of them at some point is rejection from somebody they love, or betrayal from somebody they love. And nothing can prepare you for that level of pain. But you can't even handle somebody having a difference of opinion with you and be civil about it. You have complete breakdowns and meltdowns, and if everybody in the room isn't on your side, then everybody's horrible. And when you become an adult, there's going to be, and here's another one which they're not going to be ready for, because if you can't get into a relationship with somebody, you're going to become lonely. And lonely is a darkness with no light that's never ending.
Yeah. There's something, actually, I was telling some people before my daughter was born, and I'll tell them that today, still, even after she's born, that my job as a father, like the ultimate goal is not just to know that so that she knows that she's loved and cared for and that I'm here for, is that when she becomes an adult, my job for the next 18 years is to prepare her for that world where, if she falls, if she's betrayed, if she's hurt in the deepest ways, does she have the strength and the capacity to pick herself up?
Yes.
I think that's the main role of, especially the father, is to prepare the child for the harshness of the world, so that inevitably, when the hurt does come, it's not, it can be earth-shattering, and you can sit there and be like, man, maybe I want to just kill myself. It's the kind of strength to pick yourself up afterwards based on the lessons you've learned, and the coping mechanisms you've learned throughout your life, and just kind of the general feel of, this sucks, but I've gotten through things before, I can get through this now, and kind of move forward. And I think there's a lot of people will have this critique of the current generation, the upcoming generation of coddling, and I absolutely see it, which goes back to our concept, our discussion of, do the kids have the right coping mechanisms? And some do. I mean, this isn't an all-encompassing generational issue.
No, it's not. Some will thrive.
And I think this is the weird thing, and I think it might have been Goggins who said this, it's like, it's never been easier to succeed because so many people want to give up. And all you have to do is just keep going, and you will succeed.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're going to fail and you're going to fall down, but if you get up and just keep going, you will succeed.
Yeah.
And most people, 99% of people, are just going to give up. So it's never been easier to actually succeed, because all you have to do is just keep going.
Well, Dana White said something a little similar about. I mean, he was quite derogative about the generation and his opinion of them. But he said, if you're a savage, he said, you're going to succeed because these guys are too weak to. I think he called them all pussies. And he said, and you're just going to. He said, anyone who's a savage is just going to run through them all, and you're going to be unstoppable because you're not going to have any competition.
Yeah. Which it reminds me of that very vulgar scene in Team America. You ever saw that movie?
No.
When I'll just refer people to the bar scene. It's a funny take from the South Park guys on the nature of the world.
Yeah.
And he says, the world's filled with three types of people: dicks, pussies, and assholes. And dicks just want to go out there and fuck everything and fuck everyone. Pussies will just sit there and take it, and they won't do anything about it. And assholes just want to shit on everyone. And so
true,
the question is, what do you believe?
Yeah, it's true.
It's this funny, just overly vulgar bit from the movie that has this nugget of wisdom of like, yeah, there's people out there that will just, no matter what you do and how well you succeed or fail, they're gonna shit on you.
Yeah.
And there's people out there that no matter what happens to them, they never learn those boundaries. They never had that kind of aggressive reaction to boundaries getting pushed. They just get walked over. And there's the people that will just take advantage of everyone. And it's no person, I think, most people, not no person, most people aren't just one or the other. There's elements of each within all of us.
But I think it's like things that will hurt people that they're not aware of, which happen to you as adult. Your best friend will stab you in the back, and you'll be like, "Oh, well, I didn't see that coming." But it could be your husband, it could be your wife, it could be the guy that you've been going to work with every day for 10 years, and you suddenly find out he grassed you up so he could get a promotion, and you're just like, hang on, we would literally, you were around my house having a barbecue just yesterday, and Monday you're like, you've got this promotion, and you've just said, we can't hang out anymore because things are things, and by the way, you're in trouble because I grassed you up. You're like, hang on a second, people don't always understand that motivations are a big thing when you're an adult, and people get motivated to do things, good and bad, negative, positive, whatever. But ultimately, they're motivated by self-preservation and trying to rise above everything else. And if there's a way for them to do that at your expense, you shouldn't be surprised if they do, even though all of the films tell you that they won't. No, in real life, people do. Yeah.
There's, I've talked about this actually in my ethics class a bit, because I see a lot of the kids come in with a kind of nihilistic, apathetic mentality. Nothing matters. Morality is all subjective. And I say, well, hold on, wait a minute. Because when we get at the core of the idea of good and evil, I mean, no one in history has ever done anything that they're like, this action is evil, I'm going to do it.
No.
Everything someone does, their own opinion of it is good. And so there's you mentioned self-preservation, but there's the kind of self-interest good that every single person goes for. And it always depends on the nature of the individual and kind of how far along the psychopathy spectrum they might be. Because if they're pretty far along, they're going to walk over everybody. But if they're pretty mild on that spectrum, then they're going to be less inclined to backstab you at work or to cheat on their partner, that sort of thing. And so even in those situations where, I backstabbed this person, well, that's because, in my view, it was good because I got the promotion. Because it helps me, because it helps my family, or it helps.
And they'll
all these
justify it
things.
as well, is because you couldn't backstab me and you're not strong enough for the role.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
as you were saying that about ideas of what's good and what's evil, it reminded me of Avengers with Thanos wiping out
yeah,
half the known universe. It was a
yeah,
good thing as far as Thanos was concerned. It was necessary.
yeah,
And he was the only one that had the courage and the willpower to achieve it.
yeah,
And as far as he was concerned, he was saving the universe. Not
yeah,
endangering it, not risking it, saving it.
yeah, yeah. And this is I mean, everyone wants to kind of go towards the Hitler argument. I mean, in Hitler's mind, what he was doing wasn't evil. This is for the good of the German people. This is, I mean, and it's very clear that this, as a human issue, is not a good thing. But the argument is, in his head, he wasn't sitting there going, well, this is a bad thing, I'm going to do it anyways. This is what I think is best for me and my people. And so he's going to.
Because this is the other thing that is I find interested about that. The first one being that when everyone goes on about Hitler being right wing, actually he was left wing. He was a socialist. He wasn't right wing at all.
Democratic socialist.
Yeah, he was, and he was the German, it was a socialist party. So, but we judge it by today's standards. And in 1939, well, before that, I think it was 1931 or something, people knew who he was and voted for him. And I think it was something like 9 million people voted for him. 9 million people shared his idea. And there was lots of disputes over territories following on from World War One. There was lots of animosity. And people didn't live in peace. It wasn't a peaceful time. And actually, your neighbour might well have been your enemy. And people don't understand this concept. And they don't grasp the concept of, like, 1 in 4 children died. There's, like, child mortality but before the age of 5. If you got some illness, the chances are you wouldn't live, because medicine wasn't what it is today. It just didn't exist in the same way. I mean, they barely understood the rules of hygiene. I mean, some of the most forward-thinking medicines that we have today came out of World War II. One of them being burns, treating them with saline solutions, because they literally noticed that pilots that fell into the sea who got burnt had better survival rates because of the salts in the water. It's like, up until then, nobody realised that actually saline solution could help. And so, there were so many advances because of war that in the 1920s, talk to somebody. I had a guest whose grandmother was a survivor of the 1920s depression, and in I can't remember where it was in America, but her great grandmother or grandmother, I can't remember, must have been a grandmother, was married off to the neighbouring farmer when she was like 13, because basically the family was so poor they needed to get rid of her. So she ended up with a child by the time she was 14 or something, and eventually got left by her husband, and I think she kind of walked to Chicago or something. Do you know what I mean? It was and basically her only item of clothing, and people don't understand this, grain sacks, when they used to be made out of hessian, they were made in different colours and stuff like that because people used the material to make clothes. They were that poor. So do you think they cared about somebody getting killed in Germany? No. Because they didn't know if they were going to eat today or tomorrow.
I think there's a cultural amnesia that we definitely have towards just our own culture and history, which is, I mean, as a historian, it's sad to see, and it's especially sad to see out of the kids when, I mean, granted, I mean, history is not always the most enjoyable subject for for kids. I mean, depending on how it's taught, etc.,
Yeah.
it can be extremely dull. But there's, as we mentioned, there's such a kind of care, kind of almost people. A lot of these kids want to kind of attach their moral value to their stance on modern issues, and they won't have the historical context to understand where a lot of these things came from.
Yeah.
Or they won't have the historical context to basically say, things really aren't that bad.
No.
Arguing for either or against some sort of perceived oppression, that, are you sure it's not just you? Like, is it just your own perception of this? I have a friend who he gets a little defensive about things sometimes, like, oh, that guy was mean mugging me. It's like, he's just looking at you. There's no reason for you to take that as some sort of personal slight, because everyone looks at everyone. I see someone walk by, like, oh, that's an interesting individual. They're wearing something that I don't normally wear. Oh, all right, on to the next thing. And it's just kind of, we're visual creatures. But he'll get kind of visibly upset sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, man, I don't know why this guy was just staring me down. It's like, he wasn't. It's your own perception. It's you feel that you're being slighted for something that really you're not. And I see that with a lot of the kids. There was a student who identifies as trans in one of my last classes, and he was arguing against one of the political parties, basically saying they're trying to take away their rights. And it kind of begged the question, like, well, what exactly do you feel is being taken away from you? Or, I mean, potentially being taken away from you when you become an adult. Because there's no mainline movement in the West that's arguing for an adult not to be able to do whatever they want themselves.
No, there isn't.
That's the kind of the boogeyman of the left is saying that the right wants to take away all LGBTQ rights, and it's, if you listen to any of the major kind of right-wing thinkers, they're saying, like, no, I just don't want it with kids. Like, a kid,
that's it. Literally, leave the kids alone. That's pretty much all they're saying, is leave the children alone.
Which is funny, because then it's the same essential argument that the left will make against things like female genital mutilation. Like, well, this isn't right for women in this part of the world to go through this. This is an affront on their bodies. It's a permanent thing that's happening to them. It's, well, why is that not okay for you? But then, very similarly, I mean, essentially chemical castration of a child, you're okay with, because they believe it. I always like the kind of silly comparison that people make of, like, yeah, when I was 8 years old, I thought I was a pirate. That doesn't mean I was going to cut my leg off and
it's true, though.
Walk around.
It's true, though.
Doctors will look at me like, no, we'll pat him on the head. No, like, they'll phase out of it, which more studies are showing that a lot of the kids are kind of phasing out of the trans identity. And as a teacher, I see this. I don't see a whole lot of difference between this and any other fad movement.
Nor do I. The only difference I see is the indulgence. That it's being indulged at a really high level. And I'm somebody that I have this question that I ask people sometimes. And I'll say to them, like, do you remember your grandparents? And they'll say, yeah. And I'll say, right. So if you had to explain to your grandparents today, this is what's going on, how would you explain it to them? And because if you can't, then it's a problem. And that's, and you know, and I've used that discussion when it's AI. Did you mean how would you explain it to them? Because if you can't, then we don't understand what we're doing. And whenever I've put that argument towards the ideology of trans, it's like, well, if you can't explain it, we don't understand what we're doing, because you should be able to explain the basic premise of anything to anyone,
Yeah.
And when you can't, yeah, and the one that always stuck out in my head, which was just for me again, and I've had this debate with lots of people, because ultimately it comes down to, this is what somebody thinks of themselves. Okay, fantastic, but the argument still stands. If I took 10 men, 100 trans, put them on an island, and you went there in 500 years, archaeologists would find 110 male skeletons.
Yeah.
If I took 10 men and 100 women, in theory, you'd have a thriving community in 500 years. So it's outside of that you are what you are.
Yeah.
Where we get nuance and levels is how you feel about yourself. Right. Okay. Come back to me when you're old enough to make decisions and vote.
Yeah. I mean, even then, there's the brain isn't fully mature until 25.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I think of myself when I was 21, and I mean, I still made reckless decisions. I still made stupid decisions.
I'm 50 this year, and I haven't stopped making stupid decisions. I'm a lot better. I am genuinely a lot better. But even I sometimes think, wasn't your best decision, was it, David?
Yeah. Well, there's an interview with a elderly British lady I remember watching, and the kind of host of the interview was basically saying, so if your grandson wanted to transition, go on hormone replacement or hormone therapy, puberty blockers, all that sort of thing, would you support them? And the grandmother said, absolutely. If this is how they feel, I want to support how they feel. And again, this comes from, it's funny looking at it psychologically, because it comes from a place of toxic compassion.
Yeah.
That it's the same mentality that led to the euthanasia of different mental cases in 30s Germany.
Yeah.
Right. It's this. Well, this is best for.
Yeah, that's where it comes from. People think these things are evil. No, they're well intentioned. Not everybody is an evil dictator.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the grandma is sitting there going like, absolutely, I want to support my granddaughter, my grandson in their kind of really quest to find themselves. It's like, all right, that sounds very nice. And then the host asks, well, if they want to get a tattoo, would you do that?
I think I've seen that, yeah.
She goes, no, that's a permanent decision. It's like, well, so are puberty blockers. This is a permanent thing that, as you said, like there's so much that is unknown about it. Aside from a number of these chemicals get used for like chemical castration of sexual offenders.
Yeah.
Right. So you're giving a castrating element to a child that is feeling isolated, which that is what I mentioned before of like it seems like a kind of fad movement is, and I don't mean that in a belittling sort of way, but I don't see a lot of the trans identifying kids much different than the way the emo kids in the 2000s seemed, or the punks, or the goth, or the greasers. Or I mean, every single generation has this kind of counterculture movement, and especially in the teenage sphere, right? Of I want to rebel against everything. Well, here's a group that will accept me, and I think to me this is not just the kind of how much it's accepted at higher levels, especially in the medical world. That's worrying, but the level to which it seems almost religious in the I kind of think of the born again mentality,
become
of born again
fanatical.
Christian. The second an individual identifies as trans, it's almost like a ablution of their sins. Everything that they've done is, you know what, you are totally accepted within our community, which to me, again, like when we talked about the Catholic Church last time,
Yeah.
there's a very similar religious mentality of once you kind of baptize yourself in this movement, you are totally accepted for who you are. And it's that sort of mentality that led to some of the worst Christian atrocities. And I don't see that necessarily being much different now.
I'm pretty sure in the UK they've just banned puberty blockers.
Yeah, I think it was the UK, and then some of the Scandinavian countries recently came out with.
They banned it. They've just said no, we're not doing it, because there's been a massive investigation because of the Tavistock inquiry, and they've just found out that they're just like, hang on a second, I need to be careful here because I don't know all of the facts, partly because I think the inquiry is still going on, but they've banned it because it appears that you encouraged this. You didn't actually explore whether they felt this way or not. You encouraged it.
Yeah.
And now they've got irreversible damage that these girls, these boys will never revert back. And what are you going to do? Because you've ruined their life before it even started. Yeah,
and I think it's it's one of the Scandinavian countries. It might be Norway, but can't remember exactly. That they were the kind of pioneers of this movement in the modern world, but they did it in a much better way. I think it required 2 years of therapy prior to any sort of medication. They said, we want to sit here and talk with you and see what's going on, because again, like the kind of joining the religious movement of this is, you need to be sure this isn't a lonely 13-year-old who's saying, I get bullied at school, I don't feel like I belong anywhere, and there is a group of people saying they will accept me for who I am no matter what. That is enticing and intoxicating kind of pull.
The thing is, I think when they become adults, and like you and your wife are discovering, you now have a child, so time is a different priority. What was once a priority 8 weeks ago doesn't matter. It's just like no, the child is now the new clock and the new demander of time, and it's the new Thanos. It decides everything, right?
Yeah. She snaps her finger. It's like, all right, we're there.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And it's what these teenagers are going to discover is in 10 years, when they leave school, at least 50% of the kids that they went to school with, they're never going to see again. If they're lucky, they'll still be friends with a couple of them 5 years after school. But by the time they're 25, they'll be lucky if they know anybody from school anymore. And all of those people would have gone off and started their own lives, will be doing their own things. And that uniqueness you had at school, nobody cares about it in the adult world. You decided you identified like this, you decided you identified like it, and everybody applauded you. Well, all of those people are now doing something, and they're all either finding a purpose or have a purpose, or are just struggling to get by. But what they're not interested in is your problems, because adults, it's not that they don't care, they don't have the free time to indulge every whim of every adult around them, and they spend their life trying to avoid people that cause them problems. It's not school.
It's funny whenever you do meet someone who does make that a priority, to just see how tired they always are, emotionally exhausted. Like, I can't deal with my own life. It's like, well, because you've sacrificed your own well-being for the well-being of all these people around you.
And it's interesting because those people always, when someone like you and I, who we would consider ourselves pretty decent people, as average human beings go, I'd put myself above average as decent, but when you meet people who are just always giving themselves to everyone else and then telling you about their problems, doesn't take you long before you distance yourself, because you're just like, dude, come on, love, just quit, give yourself some time. Oh no, they need this. Yeah, look, if you can't fend for yourself and sort your own problems out, don't come to me, because your problems are taking on the world's. And if you haven't figured that out yet, you're just dragging me down.
I mean, it goes back to that issue of compassion that I mentioned before. You can have toxic levels of compassion for others on a big scale or on a smaller scale. That, I mean, even if you want to think about it of kind of a therapeutic way of well, I still want to take care of people around me. You want to be a good friend. That's all fantastic. At the same time, you can't adequately do that if you don't properly take care of yourself.
It's one of the first things I learned in therapy as a coach. As people, as a hypnotherapist and somebody who works with people, and I work with head injuries and stuff like that, and I've worked with addicts. I've worked with you cannot help somebody that doesn't want to help themselves, and it's a cliche.
Oh, no.
But it's so true. And anybody who spent any time with anyone, whether they're trying to lose weight, whether they're trying to learn a language or learn to play an instrument, if they're not prepared to put in the time and help themselves, nothing's going to help them. Nothing's going to change. Yeah.
And it's, I think it's a funny sort of thing, because this is, kind of to draw back to the book where each of the characters are going through their own struggle. This happens with every book, though, and it's funny because every reader of everyone who enjoys a book, right, whether it's Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, James and the Giant Peach, doesn't really matter, right? Everyone who sits there and like, oh, I enjoy that book, I enjoy that protagonist, is an identifying with them, or you want to kind of be in that element, right? You want to be Frodo, or you want to be Aragorn, or Harry, or whoever it is. But I think there's not enough, in a way, self-reflection of, well, you are your own Harry Potter. And you're not recognizing that, like, Harry's life under his aunt and uncle was terrible. And he's basically an orphan all alone at school. Like, this is a terrifying thing for him. And so the struggles he's going through, the struggles that the reader is then, it's funny because they wish they had someone else's struggles, but you don't have to look far to find your own. And it's a neat sort of mental trick that once you recognize, like, wow, this is my ring, this is my Voldemort, this is the struggle I'm undergoing. And once you recognize kind of the excitement of that, it can change things so quickly and in a much healthier way.
Because as you were just saying that about Harry Potter, there's something that it just dawned on me, the depth of some of the scenes when Harry Potter's in the house with his aunt and uncle, because he has all this power that he can't use, and he's trapped, literally trapped because of his power, because they know he's a wizard, and it's because of his greatness that he's trapped under the stairs in this little room where dust falls on him every time his cousin bounces up and down the stairs. And that's this weird kind of concept that film particularly, I say, shows really well. I've just dawned on it as you and I as you're reminding me of this scene of, we think that having a superpower or having some magical greatness will allow us to escape, but actually it can be the very thing that entraps us.
Yeah, it goes back to the Spider-Man quote, like, with great power comes great responsibility. I think responsibility overall is a terrifying thing for a lot of people, because it's a self-recognition that if I fail, I can't blame anyone. It's on me. And that, I think, is, to those that haven't conditioned themselves to fail and kind of pick themselves up afterwards, that's a terrifying prospect, because there's a certain comfort of the victim idea, or the mentality of well, the reason I'm not getting ahead.
Well, we talked about in counselling. There's a whole module in counselling on the power of being a victim. It's one of the most powerful motivations to not move and not let go of something, because if I can blame somebody else, it's not my fault. I don't have to take responsibility for my shitty life because it's not my fault. And the minute you step out of that umbrella, then you actually have to face the storm on your own, and you have to become the solution to your own problems. Whereas if I can blame Martin because, you know, Martin's my landlord or Martin's my manager or whatever, then it's not my fault, it's Martin's. And if Martin wasn't in my life would be better. But, well, why don't you get a new job? And it's just silence.
I got to pay bills because, you know, there's a new, I got to pay taxes, which that's, I guess, a fair point. But the idea that it's individuals who have really internalized that, they bounce it between people. And it's always a deflection, which is, I think, again, an interesting kind of view of the ego. Of it's almost this infallible Christ-like figure that I'm just persecuted by everyone. It's like nothing will ever be wrong with me.
No. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because everybody hates the boss that doesn't give them credit. But then nobody wants to take responsibility for mistakes.
Yeah. I think that I have a funny little anecdote about that, actually. One of my first classes in grad school was with a titan of the industry, Dr. Marianne Kowaleski, and she's basically the foremost authority on women and family in the Middle Ages. And I'm taking a class titled that with what will become my wife, right? So she's in class with me, and I'm supposed to present on education and early childhood education in the Middle Ages. And what I had read basically gives me a week to read all the literature out there, which, I mean, that's kind of the trial by fire with grad school. It's like you either sink or swim. And so reading all these different books, these different scholars, and I did my best, but then at one point I mentioned something in my presentation, and the professor, Dr. Kowaleski, she just looks me straight in the eye as I'm giving this presentation. She goes, "Actually, that's wrong." And it's just a death stare at me, which it's funny, like in my mind, in my memory of this, which is likely a little skewed, a bunch of the students kind of looked at me, like the other fellow grad students, like, "Oh, what's he going to do?" I basically said, "All right, well, you are the expert. I'm just new to this. I'm, taking responsibility for my own presentation, but if this is wrong, it's wrong. I'm discovering this basically for the last week. I completely defer to you if you want to correct me on this and what the accurate information is." And it was it's funny because it seemed to almost disarm her. Yeah. I wasn't expecting I was expecting like a pushback. It's like, why should I push back on something that I'm new to? This is just what I've read. This is what I've seen. You've spent 30 some years in this field. You clearly know what you're talking about. So this is what I've found. I will take responsibility if it's wrong, but if it's wrong, please correct me. And it like I said, it had kind of a disarming quality to it that impressed her, because she was, again, expecting that kind of pushback. And she mentioned afterwards, when we were talking about how the presentation went, she said that a lot of students have issues with that. They really struggle with saying, all right, my point may be wrong, and that's fine, and then moving on. And I think that's part of the kind of modern education has really bred this idea of take a point and argue it, and you die on that hill. And I think if your pursuit is to be right, then that's the approach. But if your pursuit is truth or just knowledge in general, it makes no sense to die on that hill. Which again, that was my whole mentality of like, I'm at grad school to learn, and if this is wrong, correct me so I can learn. The point isn't that I want to be right. It's the point is I want to know what is right so I can figure it out for the future.
That's absolutely true. And we're going to have to call it time because you and I have gone over an hour already.
Already?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
But again, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. And there you go. Martin and I, in our own way, putting the world to rights. Please do check out his book, Children of the Dying Hearth. I will make sure the links are in the description. And if there's anything you'd like us to discuss, you'd like our opinions on anything, please drop us a line or give it a mention in the comments. And we'll do our best to talk about it and discuss it. And as always, thank you very much for listening. I do appreciate the support. Please, wherever you are from, whatever you believe, please take care and be blessed. Look after yourself.